Gary,
Yeah.
it is awesome to see you again and hear you again this time. I painfully am not in your physical presence like we were last time when we were able to do our more in-depth interview with you and your history. And now hearing your story and the way you related to me about your whole history with GE in the passing of the late great Jack Welch. It really meant a lot more to me watching and hearing you sort of walk me through that history. Is incredible. But I'm
Yep.
glad to be back with
I
you here
miss him
again.
terribly. A lot of
Yeah,
people miss him terribly. Yep.
no doubt, no doubt. And it was an incredible sort of relaying of your history as CIO over GE and underneath his mentorship. That was great. Thank you for that. And for those that are listening to this podcast, we'll provide a link to the interview we did with Gary late in 2019. So, Gary, here we are. It is now March on my watch, March 18th, 2020. The folks that are listening to this are all in a state of newness. And that newness has been brought on by this sort of global pandemic that we're all facing and has affected lives everywhere around the globe. It is, as I say often to my family, to my employees, this is a new world order, and it's one where we, as global citizens, let alone citizens of our companies, need to show up and stand up. And now's the time to get work done and keep people focused and motivated. And for today, I wanted to basically walk through a few things with you to get your perspective on the market, obviously on this current condition. And we'll talk about a number of things related to that. But first, let me ask you, how are you doing in this period? Where are you?
I am home in Connecticut. And look, there's lots of bad about what we're doing here, but there's one good thing, which is my son and daughter and his wife and daughter are all up and staying with us from New York City, since New York City's maybe a little scarier than Connecticut. So the good news is that we've got our entire family here. So that's the plus.
That's fantastic. I know it's been interesting. I have two teenage boys, one about, ready to go on to college. The other is still in high school. And my oldest is really concerned that there will be no normalcy to, things that they've been looking forward to, like a graduation or,
Right.
what happens to will he be going to college? All of these things you can just feel the weight. And again, as parents, and you just have to show up and, look them in the eye and say, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this.
Yeah.
So
I agree with that. And look, there are some, with all the fear and everything, there are some, I guess they call them green shoots out there in terms of, there are some early indications that certain medicines that have worked on other flus are beginning to work on this as well. And there's indications that we're getting close to a vaccine. So there are some pluses out there along with all the negatives.
That's right. Yeah, and I've heard the same, and that is very, very encouraging. So for today, let's tap into this sort of wealth of knowledge you have. You sit again in a very, very interesting position. Especially as you in your person, in your history intersects our company, JumpCloud. You have this sort of historical perspective and current perspective of IT. And the way companies are working. And then the other lens that you have, which is very unique, is as a partner at General Electric, you just have this very unique perspective across a wide swath, so to speak, of companies and the way they manage things and IT and otherwise. The spirit of this podcast today is just to sort of walk through that. Let's hit on the first area. Now, JumpCloud, has been sort of evangelizing in many ways, sort of modern ways to think about how IT does their job and how companies could better support their folks in an exercise of working remotely or disparately. Obviously, we were thinking about this less as a forcing function of a global pandemic and more just as, this is just the way of the future. So let's talk about that. We camp this in something we call at JumpCloud the future of work.
Yeah.
What I want to ask you first is which are the changes that orgs you're seeing in your preview in that they are implementing in the short term because of this, forced global pandemic? What do you see sticking for the long haul?
Yeah, it's the right question. Is what stays and what goes back to the way it was. And I guess and if you go back in time to say the early 2000s when there was SARS in China
Yep.
and people had to stay home and everything, that was in many ways uh, many people attribute the success of Alibaba uh, in China to the fact that the early success to the fact that people all of a sudden had to figure out new ways of buying and selling goods. And if you go to the 2008 financial crisis, and people were trying to figure out how to kind of get around, and many people attribute the early success of Uber and Airbnb to that. So you can easily imagine that there are other things in all three of those companies that caused their success, but it is clear that during times of shock and times of recession, that new business models come out, and it's hard to know exactly what those new business models are going to be right now, but there's a good chance that there will be some new business models that come out.
Right.
A way to think about what this is doing to the world of business, and this is the framework I use, is it will actually homogenize what many people have already been doing in terms of using technology to make them more productive. And I'll just give you a few examples of that. So
Please, yeah.
e-signatures, right? E-signatures. Some companies use it. Some individuals are comfortable with it. When you're remote, all of a sudden, it's the only game in town. E-banking more generally, whereas many people have been going to bank branches to conduct their banking. All of a sudden, digital banking becomes the only way to do banking. And while many of us have already been doing digital banking and rarely go into a branch, all of a sudden, everyone is now having to learn how to do that. And that may change the way everyone does banking. But for right now, it's harmonizing and homogenizing how people bank. And my guess is that'll persist, where you'll have more digital banking in the future than you had in the past, just because of this. Another example is telemedicine, which, as you know, there are many ventures out there of connecting providers with patients that need help, both physical and mental emotional help. And my strong guess is this will surge associated with what we're going through right now, and that will actually grow those businesses and as people get used to using those kinds of services. The broader point, I think, is that what this is doing is causing what many people were already doing, but not most, to the point where everyone begins to operate that way. So in many ways, it equalizes the use of digital technologies, whether it's teleconferencing, whether it's video conferencing, all of these things that many people use now. Everyone is frankly being forced to initially, and then over time will enjoy the benefits of those technologies.
Interesting perspectives. Yeah, especially the Uber and Alibaba ones are very, very emblematic of crises, forming, new ways of thinking about business.
Yeah, no doubt. And I didn't. Somebody had a very good quote a while ago that said, "The future is here; it's just not evenly distributed." I think what this does is it evenly distributes productivity technology across the entire workforce globally.
Right. And when you are watching these sort of patterns develop, either currently or those that you've seen in the past, I mean, you gave me some good examples of companies that were born out of necessity in many ways to solve new, basically new ways to solve old problems. When you are seeing these businesses making these sort of short-term impulsive moves, like the way they need to work, after all this dust settles and the crisis, so to speak, is over, do you think that there's going to be a muscle memory where folks, IT and business leaders, just sort of recoil back to their same patterns, or is this sort of now, sort of tattooed on us that we have to move
Sure.
forward in this new way? What's
Yeah.
your perspective on that?
As usual, it's never 100% one way or the other. My guess
Yeah.
is, let's take some. I'll make up some numbers. 30 to 40% uh, of knowledge workers were already using technology to allow them to be as productive remotely as they were in the office. Um, when things go back to normal, will it will it be 100%? No. Will it be 30, 40%? No, it'll be somewhere in between there. Call it maybe, split the difference, call it 70% of people. So there will be more use of technology, but still people are going to want to get together. They're going to need to get together. There is the spontaneity uh, of idea generation that comes when people are in the same place that is going to be hard to replicate. And I think
Right.
everyone knows that. And so coming up with processes, even now, I know some companies right now are doing things like every morning having each team connect with each other, and they first of all they insist on it being a video connection, not an
Mhm.
audio connection, so
Right.
that everyone can see everybody else, and that each person kind of lays out what they're trying to get done for the day, and where they can get help. So having set processes like that for how people use technology to replicate the kind of spontaneous collaboration that was going on when people were together is, I think, going to be important. And it may be some of those things that persist even when we can go back to quote unquote living normally.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny you bring that up. We are obviously a software engineering driven company with
Yep.
deep agile practices. The way you describe the daily, sort of meeting is exactly what we've deployed across our company. Think of them as daily stand-ups that are
Right.
basically designed exactly like an engineering team would do, but to help our current, rank and file employees that are non-engineering basically get an assessment, understand what's up, get their directive, and move forward.
Right.
And it just has to be done at you need the human touch. And what that means is your manager may not be able to physically touch you, but you see their eyes. We do use cameras, and just so we can be as close to each other as we can in these moments. So yeah, we've deployed that tactic as well.
Yep.
Well, let's move into another area. Let's go deeper down sort of the specifics of IT. And again,
Yep.
this is going to tap into your, great history here, but we want to get a sense of what modern IT will look like, at least from
Sure.
your eyes.
Sure.
What do you think are the most beneficial steps an org can take to modernize their IT? And again, you can look at that, in the lens of a global pandemic. I'm just curious what your thoughts would be.
So I think of uh, the use of technology in one very specific way, which is that if you take the key business processes or the key processes of any given business, typically the ones that face customers and consumers, but also those that face employees, shareholders, and other stakeholders, uh, technology that allows you to have the best business processes and best defined by the fastest and the most defect free, those two, for the least amount of tech money devoted to technology, are the best run companies. So let me say it again. If you've got business processes facing customers, consumers, employees, shareholders, stakeholders of all types, and you've got business processes that are the fastest and the most defect free, and you as a company have spent the least amount of money on technology to get that done, you are the most successful companies. Now, it's not often easy to spend a little amount of technology and get perfect business processes. There's a concept called straight-through processing that many financial service companies use to define what percent of all, say, customer and consumer interactions are done completely digitally without any human intervention whatsoever. And clearly, the companies that are able to have the most digitally intensive businesses, meaning that require the least amount of human intervention, are those that delight the customers and consumers the most, and those that drive the greatest productivity inside the company as well. So it's a theoretical statement, clearly, but that is the framework with which one should look at all technology investments. Is, are you allowing straight through processing? Are you allowing the best cycle time in front of stakeholders with the least amount of defects?
Agreed.
There's a second perspective.
I would add one small thing in there that is a thread that runs through all of that, especially through straight through processing. Security. You can't compromise it.
So that was exactly what Craig, you read my mind. That was the second thing, which is obviously all of this has to be incredibly secure. And there's a place where JumpCloud obviously shines. But there's a view, at least that I have and others have, as to how the whole security approach will change and is already in the process of changing. And many people have different names for it. Some call it domainless. I know you do. Others call it zero trust. But there's a view that as much effort as you put on controlling the perimeter, controlling access to applications, detecting, running software that detects inappropriate or surprising things going on in the network, that even with all that, companies get breached. And that at its core, what is the right way to think about security, and we are gradually getting to the point where we as a technology community can do this, is to get to the point where your data, all of the permissions and all of the policies are at the data level, and then all of the validation of Greg coming in and saying Greg is who he says he is, that is being done equally effectively. And so if Greg is the only person that is allowed to decrypt certain data, then the only thing you need to do is be sure that when Greg says he's Greg, that he is in fact Greg. And whether that's 2-factor authentication, 3-factor authentication, 5-factor authentication, and we can talk about what that means, that is the ultimate security. Is that the policies are established at the data level in terms of who can do what with the data, and then guaranteeing that you are who you say you are is the second piece of it.
Absolutely. You hit sort of a passion point of mine. Let me kind of nudge at the concept that you brought up, which is the domainless enterprise. Obviously, this is a term that JumpCloud has been using for time ad infinitum. Any moment I get a chance to address a public crowd in some capacity, I'm talking about the ways that the modern world has effectively, scuttled the old way of thinking. And to get very specific on that, I liken the domainless enterprise to sort of the following visual image. If you could, this is a podcast, so people close your eyes and you can imagine this. Imagine your office setting in 1993 or 4, and you walked into that office. There's a brick and mortar. You may or may not have had a key card to get into that office space. You proceeded to walk directly to your desk, a workstation, if you will. And note that word. This comes back, from the the age of the Industrial Revolution, when workers walked up to their workstation, which was typically a lathe. You just translate that into a modern digital sense, and you have a computer sitting in front of you, which, guess what, was tethered through an Ethernet to some central location sitting there in your brick and mortar office, that gave you access to stuff, the world of the quote domain controller. Now, fast forward that mental visual image, and imagine you tear down all the walls of that physicality, and you as an employee were able to pick up that big machine and walk to any place on earth with it, and with no office around you, on a mountaintop, and start to compute. That's the domainless enterprise. That is our current reality. So let's let's focus in that vein. When we're sort of seeing companies move in this direction, obviously there's a plethora of different software vendors. I think we contribute to it. There's architectures like Zero Trust and Beyond Corp. You mentioned Zero Trust before. How are you seeing companies sort of evolve this? Basically, it's a two-part question, Gary. One is, what's holding them back? Two, we're hearing a forcing function of, you can't work in an office anymore because it may kill somebody. What do companies need to do to evolve to get to the domainless enterprise faster?
Sure. So I think what's going on right now is parallel efforts, where certainly large and medium-sized enterprises are still employing perimeter protections, are still doing endpoint detection and response, and are still doing network detection. Some do, some don't. While at the same time, they are beginning to deploy data policies. And that is a newer concept. But the companies that have been deploying that, and there are many companies that allow you to deploy a data policy in your environment, as they use those tools to do this, they have not shut down perimeter controls, nor application controls, nor endpoint controls, nor network controls. And so it's going to take, I would think, 5 to 10 years before people are comfortable with strictly using data policies and multi-factor authentication as the way to go.
Got it. Yeah, it's sort of, I mentioned the sort of brick and mortar where the key card was the verification factor to get into your actual building. This is where the criticality of multi-factor, 2, 3, 4, to your point, 5-factor authentication absolutely has to come into play to verify that, Gary is who he is, Greg is who he is, and in effect, allow the policies to do their work to ensure Gary only gets what Gary, has access to.
And just so we're clear on this multi-factor, it's not like we have to put in 5 different passwords. There are, as you know much better than I do, there are so many ways to authenticate someone where he or she does not even know it, whether or not it's where you are when you're logging in. It's the way you hit your keys, your keystrokes. It's your grammar. I mean, there are any number of ways in which one can be authenticated without it being a hassle to the user.
That's right. I mean, we're always trying to strike that balance as security engineers between security and convenience. It's that razor's edge. And you're absolutely correct. I think the new generation of multi-factor passwordless authentication, any ways where, to me, honestly, entering in a 6-digit code, not that big of a deal. But my God, it's the world's worst thing for some employees. It's too hard for them to do that.
But look, as we do more and more video conferencing, and everyone has cameras on their work, facial recognition. We've already seen that with mobile devices. facial
Absolutely.
recognition will be one of the easier factors of authentication.
Absolutely correct. Walk up to your machine, which Apple has sort of really cornered the market on,
Yep.
and guess what? You're in.
Yep. Yep.
Therein lies the challenges. This is actually a perfect segue into our final segment here, Gary, which is, transitioning from the domainless enterprise to, we're going to traverse into even more specific territory, devices. I mean,
Yeah.
my dream, and we are playing a role in a lot of this already, is as follows. It's sort of like, if we agree that remote work is going to be a thing,
Yep.
and I think we can predict that this will even become more aggressive in organizations after this
Absolutely.
pandemic.
Absolutely.
We have to look at ways to get faster and easier to onboard employees. And let's face it, if you're going to work from home, your home environment, you got a connection to the outside world through your internet provider. And then what else does the company provide you? Well, it's the machine, it's the device, it is where this work happens. I'm just trying to get a sense from you, again, on your patterns across your portfolio
Yeah.
and just to see, how do IT organizations sort of maintain the same level of device access for control for remote
Sure.
workforces?
Sure. I think it all stems back to having a great directory, because it's in the directory that all of the provisioning is allowed, in terms of saying that, Greg can have access to this application, but not that application. And for this application, he's allowed to do this, but not that. I mean, all of those things, you need a great central directory in order to be able to bring people on board quickly. And it needs to be something that is easily managed. And one version of the truth, if you will, one directory across the entire organization.
Absolutely. When, obviously JumpCloud knows a little bit about that.
I think
And,
so. Yeah.
we are now in the process of teaching the world that, the criticality of centralized access control is important. It can be
Yeah.
secured, done it up in the cloud. Okay, foregone conclusion, all that's good. The new wave of, frankly, where we see and are building towards, think of the concepts of what a directory does is provide access control, but where does that happen? On devices. So these things are, Gary, I'm not sure if you're on a Windows machine or a Mac sitting in front of you today.
Not
I
a
happen to
Windows.
be you're on a Windows machine. I happen to be on a Mac.
Okay.
That's a good example of heterogeneity in
Yep.
the device sort of world. You chose Windows, I chose Mac.
Yep.
But in this case, this is exactly, you're doing work on that machine, and it should begin to dictate a lot of the posture of security of that user, both from the moment they enter it to, I think you said it perfectly, where the heck is that machine on Earth, and does its location start to influence resource access or other mechanisms of truly verifying who the user is?
Yeah.
And this is sort of how we see the future of things playing out. Again, a lot of this is in the platform, but we're very interested in make this more seamless.
No doubt. No doubt.
Just a couple more.
I mean, it's not just identifying that the device is your device and you are who you say you are. It's also making sure that the device is clean. It has not been, it does not have any viruses on it that are going to get in the way once it connects to the network. And that's really important. That's really important.
Absolutely.
So having a system management, device management capability prior even to beginning to authenticate the user is, I think, essential for managing this.
I totally agree. We have this sort of working philosophy: right user, right location, right security, and right resource access.
That's
And
exactly right.
When you put those things in a soup, it develops a posture score
Yep.
on all of those sort of ingredients. And if they check green, you're good to go. If not, if one of them is a little out of line, how do does the rule need to do in order to either deny access or continue down a verification
Sure.
path?
And having some workflow around that is easy, an easy way to manage that.
Exactly.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So a couple more things, and I'm going to let you
Sure.
get back to your day being sequestered as we all are,
Exactly.
no doubt, and
Exactly.
back to your family. I want to get a sense of your sort of views on, as companies are going through this, should they be investing in new sorts of services and apps in a time
Yeah.
when clearly finances are going to be scrutinized?
Sure. So
And is there a
yeah.
playbook?
So it's not even a matter of should, because they don't really have choices. What happens in times like this is, as you said, budgets get slashed. Every budget, every function inside a company, their budgets are getting slashed, and the functional leaders and the business leaders are just trying to breathe with their with their with their much lower budgets. As a result, whereas in the world of technology, having been on that side of it, whereas oftentimes you are making a number of different investments, some of which are for the long-term health and hygiene of the company, and some of which are for short-term paybacks. And you're doing both typically. In this world, all you're doing are investments that have short-term paybacks. And let me be very specific. If it doesn't pay back this year, it's probably not going to get done. Right. Because people have new budgets now, and if they find some software that allows them to have lower cost, to take out cost this year, they will pursue it. If not, they're going to have a very hard time doing it.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we watched our finance team. Obviously we run a very tight ship, but this is a very different situation. So within 72
Yep.
hours, we refactored things. We looked and re-scrutinized areas of the budget in order to do exactly what you say, Gary. Just ensure we're as cost effective as possible. So yeah,
That's
it's
right.
very real. This is this is the new world order.
It's a new world order. Hopefully, not for very long.
Right, and this is true. On that subject, we're also looking at ways. Like, let me give you an example. It's like vendor consolidation. It's a thing. I don't want to have, like, our IT folks, our own 2-person IT team does not want to have 6 different types of products when they can look for a single solution, and perhaps they're missing, some of the features, but the cost differential just does not justify having 6 different tools when you can find one platform that can do things. So that's the method we're going through.
Multiple tools, you need multiple people to manage them when you have a single tool. And so the overall costs are lower if you can consolidate around one solution for many of the feature functionality that you need, for sure.
It's really, what we really were awoken to is, in a situation like that, we'll pick on the 6 different tool scenario. But you're correct. It's 6 different operating experiences. It's 6 different conversations with vendors, and it's 6 different negotiations with those vendors that puts weight on our finance team in order to get their job done. The impacts, are not just the features. It is the totality of how the software kind of presents itself across an organization. So for our listeners out there, our tactic, this is what we're doing. That's our playbook. We're getting very, we're eyeballing everything to look at how can we consolidate.
I would add one last thing. It's extremely rare that I run into software companies like JumpCloud where the customers love the product as much as they do.
We're fortunate. It's true. We've got a ton of work to do, as you know, Gary. But I think that we have a group of folks that are getting their jobs done effectively. The messages, again, we're speaking at a time during this global crisis. The messages that have come back saying, we just deployed, 450 employees to their home offices, and we couldn't have done it without you. I mean, I'm not here back patting our company, but
Right.
It just shows it's a very sobering moment of,
Yep.
whoa, this product just helped
It matters.
that company do that, and it matters. You're absolutely right.
Matters.
I appreciate
And
that.
I've just seen 2 of those as recently as today. So I'm with you.
Yeah, I know
Totally
we're sharing them with our board syndicate, and we're just as proud. With that, Mr. Reiner, I am going to dispatch you back to your wonderful family. Please keep them healthy and safe. And
Thank you, Greg.
I just
It's
want to wish.
always talk to you.
Absolutely, my friend. Be well,
right.
and we'll talk soon.
Again soon.
Cheers.
Bye. Bye.